Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining another virtual museum for the National Museum of Industrial History. Today, we are lucky to be joined by David Taylor. He is the author of 6 books, including the award-winning histories Soul of a People about the 1930 Federal Writers Project and Cork Wars, Intrigue and Industry in World War II, which is the subject of today's talk. His work has appeared in Smithsonian, Science Magazine, and documentary films, and he teaches at Johns Hopkins University. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glenn, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I just want to talk about a couple of different ways that, if anybody out there is interested in more programming for the National Museum of Industrial History, they can go to nmih.org and see some of the other programs that we have coming up. We have a full slate of programming that's going to be running from coming up this weekend all the way until beginning of June, until we hopefully can reopen the museum. Since we are closed down right now, there's a couple different ways that people can help NMIH out. You can go to our website and see those as well. Some of them include using Amazon Smile, which donates a portion of any Amazon purchase to the National Museum of Industrial History. You can purchase memberships that'll be good from 1 year until we reopen. There's a couple other ways, including shopping on our online gift shop and buying ebooks from the museum that can help us out during this time. But for right now, I will pass it over to David, who has this very intriguing story to share with you. Thanks again, David.
Thank you, Glenn. And it's an honor to be here to share this story that has deep roots for the area around the museum and with the whole part of Pennsylvania and Maryland as well. It's one that shows, I think, we see a lot of a war's extraordinary effects on ordinary people's lives through that. It's not many people know about the cork industry, that there was that America had a cork industry, or that it was important for a good part of the 20th century. The book that I'll be talking about that you see on the screen, my recent book called Cork Wars, Intrigue and Industry in World War II, is the story of this episode of importance during the war, and how it unfolds through 3 families. Basically, and the way that this unfolds, it shows kind of the connections between nature and business, and between immigration and family and security. So you can see more about the book at the website corkwarsbook.com, and you can find out more about how to order the book as well as some other pieces. As I mentioned to Glenn, there's an article in the Discover magazine for the May issue that talks about one slice of the story, so you can learn more about it there too. I'll share a few stories from the book, and then we can have time for questions. The book begins with the episode that's pictured on the cover, actually. It's a cork factory fire in Baltimore in 1940 that exposed national vulnerability in terms of national security on the eve of World War II. So one thing that people today often don't realize is how much there was an industrial component to both intelligence gathering and to national security during the war. Well, the book is called Cork Wars because of that connection between industry and the war effort. And there were American firms like Armstrong Cork, which is now Armstrong World Industries, based in Pennsylvania, and Crown Cork and Seal, which is also now based in Philadelphia. It used to be in Baltimore, where the factory fire happened. So this was the scene. The Crown Cork and Seal made bottle caps, and they used a sliver of cork from the cork oak tree, and they made millions of them. They were the nation's leading maker of bottle caps going into World War II. But cork was used in industry much more widely even than simply bottle caps. It was used as, well, before the era of cheap plastic, which really only happened after World War II. Cork was the go-to sealant for gaskets in automobiles and tanks and all kinds of engines, insulation, weaponry, and it was really a foundation for manufacturing. It was, you would see things about how, so this was a factoid from the late 1930s, early 40s, that, you know, if the crowns, the bottle caps used by the beverage industry in one year were placed end to end, they would equal the distance of 2 round trips to the moon. So Cork was a big business. And Pennsylvania and Maryland were, and some plants in New York also, were hubs of the industry in America. There was also a good component of it in Europe, of course, and England, France, Belgium also had cork factories. But for the US, the cork industry did represent a dependence, because all of the cork came from, you know, and here you see how modern it was seen as, even in, this is in the 1940 World's Fair in New York, cork was featured in a number of products, including the road surfaces of the world of tomorrow. So Futurama, it was seen as a spongy, valuable material that really could fit all kinds of uses in the industrial world. And all of that cork came from cork oak trees around, which is native to the Mediterranean, and particularly grows in Portugal and Spain. So you have, in the New York Times, you would see photos, for example, of this, of shipments of cork, that's cork oak, coming from, in this case, Portugal, to float, as they call it, the US Defense Program. It was basically becoming uses in the ramp up of building more tanks, more bomber planes, and cork was a vital piece of that equation. So when there was a factory fire that ruined a whole year's harvest of cork, it caught the attention of not only the public, but also national security officials. And looking back at how the cork comes, where it starts from, you find that it comes, in this case, from really a rustic, a very un-industrial setting. So this is the savanna forests of cork oaks in Portugal and Spain and North Africa. Here you would see, you know, herds of, whether they're pigs or cattle, grazing underneath the corks, actually feeding on the acorns of the oak trees. But you can also just see that the trunks of the trees themselves have been peeled, and that's how the cork oak is harvested. This shows a little bit more clearly how, through a very arduous and skilled manual labor, they would cut through the bark of the tree and cut off about the thickness of, yes, a wine stopper, to use for, not just for wine stoppers, but then to grind up for other purposes like the industrial use. And it was such a vital piece of the economy for Portugal and Spain that it would be under government supervision. So you see the government official just the lower left of the photo monitoring this resource going from the forest to shipments and getting shipped abroad. And as the earlier slide showed, the US imported nearly half of the world production of cork for manufacturing. So with this background and with this awareness suddenly that cork was being, had to be secured as a national item of interest, it was companies like Armstrong Cork and Crown Cork were brought into sort of the spotlight of national security. And people working for those companies in Europe were important for understanding trade flows of that item. And those working for, or those companies in America were important for rationing and securing those the needed items for the defense industry. So in this photo, you see one of the Cork officials who became key to this story, the man on the right, Melcher Marza, who he managed the Spain and Portugal factories for Crown Cork and Seal. And early in the war, after Pearl Harbor, intelligence agencies started looking for potential contacts in Europe who could provide corporate espionage information. The OSS, the predecessor to the CIA, OSS stands for Office of Strategic Services, which sounds like a bland bureaucratic agency. It was the wartime intelligence agency that went across the international and even domestic intelligence gathering. So OSS recruiters were contacting commercial, industrial figures both in New Jersey and New York and Maryland, and also they got the recommendation that Melcher Marza was someone who was on the ground already in Portugal and who was a smart businessman, who knew the terrain and who could be a source of good information. Marza was an interesting a person. He had grown up in Barcelona. He had come to the United States in 1905 when he was in his early 20s and wanted to make his mark in business. He's tried several different businesses, and then he settled with a cork company in New York, and really thrived there. He was a manager. He found better ways for the processing and patented a few of those. And then in the 20s, he had done well. Then came the great crash of 1929, and the company that he worked for was bought up by Crown Cork and Seal, and Marza found his life savings evaporated in the Great Depression, and so he had to go back to work, and so he took a job going back overseas with several of his children, including his daughter Gloria, pictured in the middle here. And you see in the passport photo, Marza and his wife, along with young Gloria and her older brother, Mel Marza Jr. And so they went back and they were turning around basically the Crown Cork and Seal factories in Spain and Portugal, which had started losing money, partly due to the Spanish Civil War, partly due to management turnover. But Marza, in that position, turned things around and was able to make a productive even amid the most turbulent years of the 20th century. So after he gets recommended to the OSS as a potential informant in Portugal, he gets contacted, and he does go back to Portugal by that point in mid 1943. It's too dangerous to have his family with him, and so they have come back. But he is on his own, and he is starting to inform how the OSS is communicating about industrial, both black markets and trade patterns at this key point of the war. So with Marza in Lisbon, suddenly the OSS cables, the secret cables coming from Lisbon and 1943 into 1944 show how wholesalers were exporting to both sides of the conflict. And this gets to the point that both Portugal and Spain were neutral during the war. So businesses in both countries would be dealing with both sides of the war. In fact, Portugal was an important source, not just of cork for the Allies, for America, but also Germany had been pressuring Portuguese exporters to triple and quadruple their exports to Germany, both of cork, but also of tungsten, another important item in defense industry that was that Hitler relied on. And so you see in the cables coming back from from Lisbon to Washington, the uncovering of how, for example, this diagram of warehouses, how you could be exporting to one line and one shipment line towards the Allies on one side, and without seeing it obviously from the other side, be shipping to German firms. And he not only sort of showed the names of companies that were using, dealing with both sides with under different names, but he showed the physical representations of how the business was uncovering. So Lisbon was a very dangerous point at that point. So Marza was definitely risking himself in that position. It was really the real life basis of the film Casablanca. So when you see Rick in Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca managing amid sort of the chaos of Hitler influenced forces and ally insurgents and refugees fleeing Europe, that's very much what Lisbon looked like at that point. I uncovered, so these files, these cables were classified until about 10 years ago, and many of the files of the OSS became declassified, but they were still hard to find in the National Archives. So it's I discovered the espionage trail and the link with Melchior Marza and other Cork industry officials, employees in the National Archives in Maryland. They were hard to find. It was really, you go to the military records room, you make some requests with the reference librarians there, and then you wait for hours for the material to come down, sort of on a cart by cart basis. But if you know or have some guidance on which places to look, you can find, whether it was the cables, you can find the names of people who were recruited by the OSS. So from Armstrong Cork, there was a young man named David Sanderson who got recruited and trained by the OSS and placed in a very dangerous part of Spain where there was a lot of Gestapo activity. But he was had reason to be there for his Cork industry connections, and he had the training of the OSS to how to stay safe. This slide just shows another part of the OSS records that how companies dealt with different sides of the war using under different names. And so suddenly this, in the time that when Marza is informing them about the activity and the contacts that he knew, he could explain how one company would export to the British under one name and under the name of Joaquim Coelho export to the other side. Actually, it would be under Barrera and Company in Maus would sell to Germany, and these actually uncovering these murky business rings helped the Allies untangle some of the black markets and really squeeze Germany's supply lines that helped to pressure in the later stages of the war. During the war on the home front, the companies kind of struggled to stay afloat in the same way, or in a comparable way, perhaps, to the way the companies are grappling now with how to deal with the restrictions on what they can do during a shutdown. Companies during the war were often mandated to either to stop commercial operations with Cork and with and keep their supplies only for defense uses. So Armstrong Cork put out a whole ad campaign sort of to show that they were still active and they were still around, and they were in fact pitching in the war effort. This ad that was in the Saturday Evening Post showed the public that this name that the public would have only associated with Cork flooring and other products like that were actually manufacturing artillery shells and other aspects of the war machine. That was the same for Crown Cork and Seal also. Their Baltimore company became retrofitted for manufacturing of B-26 bombers, which became crucial for winning the war, and for example, providing air cover at the D-Day invasion in 1944, getting the push to take out Hitler. So another family that, and the type of family that comes into play is from the communities around these factories. And many of them were surrounded by immigrant neighborhoods. They could get wartime factory jobs, or they had been working for Crown Cork or for Armstrong Cork. But there were many who enlisted. In this case, Frank DeCara was drafted. He already had 3 older brothers in the service who were in the war. So all 4 of the DeCara brothers were serving then in the military. And this was kind of a particular strain because there was, the factories were, of course, subject to heightened security measures, and people like Frank and people from Italian American backgrounds, from German American backgrounds, and of course from Japanese American backgrounds were not only subject to suspicion, but also to restrictions on whether it was curfews, whether there were whole community relocation, and in the case of the Japanese Americans, detention for most, if not all, of the war. So there were a lot of different types of experiences from the industry side of what their family experience looked like during the war. One reason why it's actually fitting to be talking about this this episode on Earth Day, 22nd, is the one strand of the story that was an effort to make America self-sufficient in cork. And so there was when the industry found that cork oaks were growing in California. They'd been imported during the late 1880s and actually grown by some growers there. And so there was a awareness that there could be more locally adapted cork oak trees, and maybe in the long run, if cork continued to be a major manufacturing item, America could grow its own cork. So there was a huge push to have tree planting campaigns in Arbor Days during the war. And again, actually, not only Earth Day, but Arbor Day is coming up in a couple of days. And it's during the war, Arbor Days were used to to plant many, many cork oak trees. And again, Melcher Marza, being an advisor who had seen and knew of cork oaks and their habitat and their growing conditions in Europe, advised on the campaign in the US. And the company was very much a private sector, public sector collaboration, so that you had planting events nationwide, and in the states where in the growing zone where cork could be grown, with the idea of long-term self-sufficiency and economic growth, perhaps growing the industry itself after the war. So in this case, you see a postcard of the Maryland governor planting a tree on the state capitol grounds. This happened from Maryland or across the band through the South, through Louisiana, through Texas, Arizona, onto California. Also participated in Arbor Days where cork and celebrating the cork industry and tree growing as a resource generally was important. You'll want to read the book for the whole story, but it does continue on even past the war. I'll simply say that cork remained an item of national security into the 1950s and the Cold War. And so you have this CIA report, again, it's a long time classified, but it was a look at cork production and trade with the Soviet bloc. So Stalin was trying to grow his own cork plantations in the Caucasus and in places where it could grow, because he also recognized it was at that point a national security issue to be able to have your own lines of production. There was, of course, one thing that they did not foresee at that point, the industry did not foresee, was how quickly plastic would replace cork in manufacturing after the war, to the point that we really forgot this whole history of this global concern in the war that had been so crucial to winning it. But you do still find trees from that campaign are sort of living pieces of that history across the country. So I've seen some from Maryland and Virginia to, in this case, California, on the grounds of the University of California Davis campus. They have a whole grove of cork oak trees that were planted from that campaign, and it's an important reminder of our connections between industry and national security and the environment. And it's one that I think is still important today. And now I'm happy to take questions that you may have. If there's things that have come in, Glenn, I'm not sure if you've seen things from questions coming in from the Facebook page.
Hey there, David. So we had one question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we had one question. Someone had asked if it kills the tree when cork is harvested.
That's a great question. Actually, cork oak is basically the only tree species that doesn't get killed by peeling the bark. So you can peel it every 8 to 10 years, and the tree remains vital, and you get a reliable harvest.
Somebody also asked if FDR personally was involved in cork-related efforts.
That's a good question. FDR didn't, as far as I know, come on hand to cork-related. He did speak on behalf of tree planting efforts during his administration, and he talked about how it was forest efforts were important. And one of his main advisors was a forester, Gifford Pinchot, who was, I believe, then an important official in forestry in Pennsylvania for many years. So I haven't found a quote from FDR about cork and cork growing, but he was certainly supportive of the tree planting initiative.
Someone asked, are there any parallels to the cork industry with rubber tree plantations?
Fascinating idea, because rubber also was an item that was identified, of course, as it is a strong parallel. It was a piece of the defense industry. It was important to national security, and of course, it was naturalized. Henry Ford was very concerned about the supply of rubber, and he created a little private country, basically carved out of Brazil, to grow rubber for his manufacturing operations. So there's a parallel there. I don't know that there was any substantial connection between them, but certainly the idea that you could grow cork and that you could grow your own supply of manufacturing material did influence the founders of the cork growing campaign at Crown Cork and Seal. I mean, they were contemporaries, and I'm sure they knew they had contacts in the auto industry. In fact, cork was used in things like dashboards and other aspects of Ford cars, and a lot of the wartime manufacturing, like the B-26 bombers, that was putting together pieces that were a lot of the final assembly was in Dearborn, and so there were definitely connections across industries that way.
Hmm. And I think the last one that we have is someone asked if cork harvesting is particularly labor intensive. They noted that some of the photos showed a lot of people in them. They were wondering if they were just posed or if it was actually took that many people to harvest.
That's a really interesting question. It's a very labor intensive and skills intensive work because you can't, and it really hasn't been mechanized. It's still a manual industry. It's still very important to Portugal's economy. And so you still find they've made improvements so it can be somewhat more efficient, but it's still a manual operation with several specialized like picks and prying tools for getting the bark off it careful enough so that you don't kill the tree and that you do have a good product that comes off. So no, those were actually, if you do go to get a chance to go to Spain or Portugal during the harvesting season, late in summer or in the fall, you can see both the operations of people doing that. And then when I visited in the research for the book, getting a chance to see how, in basically farm settings, they're flattening it out. They put bales of the cork into boiling water and flatten it for the types of shipping packages that you saw that were going onto the ship. So it's still a real kind of rural to urban path that still relies on manual labor.
Very interesting. I think that is all the questions we had. I just want to thank you again, David, for joining us and offering that a very, very interesting and unique look into some industrial history.
Well, thanks for having me, Glenn. Yes, I would recommend people check out, go to the website for more information. There are also some short videos related to the story and the industry. It's corkwarsbook.com, or you can check the May issue of Discover magazine for an article about that tree planting aspect of the story.
And for everybody out there that's looking for some more history, we're going to have some more programs that are going to be listed both on our Facebook page and on our website at nmih.org. We have a whole bunch of talks coming up. We have a full slate of things scheduled for May. And we have online industrial story time for kids will be coming up and restarting shortly. If anybody would like to help support the museum while we're closed right now, there's multiple ways you can do so that are listed over on our website, whether it's using Amazon Smile, shopping in our online gift shop, or buying a membership, adopting an artifact. There's a few different ways. So thanks for everybody for joining us today, and stay tuned for more topics. And thanks again to David for joining us. Have a good day.
Have a good day. Happy birthday.